Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Informed American podcast. I'm your host, Shelley Meyer, and today we have a bit of a twist. If you've been following my podcast, on Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, I've already tackled the first four sections in depth, um, in layman's terms to help you all understand. But as with many pieces of legislation, revisions do happen, and Trump's bill has seen some significant changes. In fact, I now have to redo my first four podcasts because of these revisions, because I want to keep you all up to date on what's going on. So, the landscape has shifted, and what we originally discussed has been updated. So, let's dive into these new revisions, what they mean for the bill, and how they could impact millions of Americans who rely on SNAP and other assistance programs. The new first bill is called Section 10101, the Thrifty Food Plan and Price Adjustments. Let's start with one of the big changes to Section 10101. This section tackles the Thrifty Food Plan, or TFP, which essentially is the cost of a nutritional, adequate, low cost diet used to determine the SNAP benefits. You might remember that in earlier episodes, we talked about how the USDA regularly adjusts the TFP to account for food price inflation and other economic factors. The TFP is used to determine the maximum monthly benefits for SNAP recipients. So it's a pretty big deal. Well, the revision here is significant. Under the new regulation, the USDA will not be able to increase the cost of the TFP. Now, that's sort of similar to what it was originally, but here are the changes. So it won't be able to increase the cost of the TFP based on its annual reevaluation of food prices unless those adjustments are based on the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. This essentially locks the TFP in place to align strictly with broad consumer price trends, potentially preventing it from increasing as rapidly as food prices fluctuate. That's People are gonna starve. Let's just put it that way. That's not funny, but you understand what I mean. So, what does this mean? For families relying on SNAP, this could mean less flexibility in the system to account for rising food costs, and food costs are rising. If the USDA is constrained by this index, it might lead to less room for the TFP to adjust based on local prices, potentially reducing the benefits of some families who rely on SNAP for daily meals. Now, for Section 10102, expanding work requirements for SNAP recipients. Moving on to Section 10102, this section addresses the work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents, or ABAWDs, who are receiving SNAP benefits. Now, currently, the ABAWD can only receive benefits for 3 months out of a 36-month period, unless they meet certain work requirements, such as working 80 hours per month, at least. The new revision raises the stakes. Now, the age threshold for those who must meet these additional work requirements has been extended to include individuals up to the age of 65, instead of just those under 55. This is a significant increase. impacting many more older individuals who may struggle to meet these employment criteria. Most people are retiring at 65, and those over 65 receiving Social Security and Medicare really don't make enough of a living wage on their Social Security. So they have to rely on SNAP benefits. And now they're going to have to keep working as well. And when you are working at the age of 65, your Social Security benefits decrease based on how many hours and how much money you make. So this is going to impact millions of people. So additionally, the revision expands work requirements for parents. Also, under this change, parents of children age 14 or older will also be required to meet these work requirements, essentially treating parents with school-aged children the same as individuals without dependents. Previously, parents of children under 18 were exempt from these additional work-related requirements. So the change is big. And finally, the revision also makes some significant exclusions. SNAP recipients who are homeless, veterans who we should be taking care of automatically, and certain foster care individuals will now be required to meet these additional work requirements, eliminating previous exclusions that applied based on their states. I thought we were supposed to take care of our veterans. So, what does this mean? These changes will likely lead to more people being cut off from SNAP benefits if they fail to meet the stricter work requirements. While the idea is to push for greater self-sufficiency, which is not altogether bad, critics argue that this will hurt vulnerable populations, including older adults, parents, and those struggling with housing instability. Now on to section 10103. Restrictions on energy assistance and SNAP eligibility. So let's move on to section 10103, which addresses energy assistance and its connection to SNAP eligibility. Currently, households that receive certain levels of energy assistance, like through low-income energy assistance or LEAP, can deduct a portion of their housing and utility costs from their income when calculating their SNAP benefits. This is known as the excess shelter expense deduction, and it's meant to help offset the cost of rising utility prices. However, under this new revision, this deduction would no longer apply to households without elderly or disabled members. This means that families without those specific household members, families that may still be struggling with utility bills, will no longer be able to deduct those expenses when determining their SNAP eligibility. Making America great again. In practical terms, this could lead to a reduction in SNAP benefits for many, many households. For families who rely on energy assistance, and that number is growing. These changes could lead to higher out-of-pocket costs for electricity, gas, and heating, while simultaneously receiving less in food assistance. Not really helping anybody. I don't see where it's helping anyone. Now on to section 10104. Prohibition on using internet connection fees for SNAP. Finally, let's talk about section 10104. This one's pretty straightforward, but still impactful. It prohibits households from using their internet connection service fees as part of their housing and utility costs when determining their SNAP benefits. Now this one changed from 10004. So that's where this revision comes in. 10004 no longer applies here. Previously, some households would include these fees in their shelter expense, but this new revision blocks that from happening. As we all know, access to the internet is increasingly necessary, almost vital for anyone looking for a job, just staying in touch with family, or finding education resources. But now, those internet connection fees won't be considered in the SNAP eligibility calculation, which could result in reduced benefits for households that rely on broadband access. This could hit low-income families particularly hard in rural or underserved areas where internet access is essential but expensive. So, what is the impact of these revisions? Here's the big picture. These revisions are all part of Trump's broader effort to reduce reliance on government assistance while pushing for more self-sufficiency. And as I said, this is not entirely a bad thing, but there needs to be steps to this, not just take everything away all at one time. It makes things very difficult for people who are already struggling. The problem here is for many families, these changes will mean less assistance at a time when they need it the most. That's why it should be a stepping stone to making these changes rather than a full-on take this away from you. So by standardizing the Thrifty Food Plan, raising the work requirements, limiting energy assistance, and cutting out internet fees from the equation, these changes will likely hurt the most vulnerable populations: seniors, parents, low-income families, and those struggling with housing instability. It's a rough road ahead for many people who depend on these programs to survive. In conclusion, we're going to move forward with caution. And as we see, the revisions to Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill might have wide-reaching effects that could ripple throughout the economy and society. And we're kind of almost seeing that already. While the idea of encouraging self-sufficiency is a key part of the bill, the truth is that these measures could make it harder, more difficult for millions of Americans to meet basic needs. I'm still going to keep a close eye on how these revisions continue to unfold, as well as continuing with the rest of this bill. Next week, I will touch on Section 10105. Now, as always, it's crucial to stay informed about how these policies are going to affect us. And it's going to affect us all. And I'll continue to break them down for you week by week. Again, thank you for joining me on today's episode of the Informed American Podcast. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like, and share. I'll be back next week with more updates and insights. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and take care.